Hi, I'm Cautex, and in this video, I'll be talking about what I think the next revolution in theory crafting will be, and why I think that we are on the cusp of that revolution happening. This is something that I touched on very briefly in my upcoming Theory Crafting 101 video on analytical methodology, but I think that it deserves its own video. Raidbots revolutionized theory crafting because of how easy it made adjusting character details in SimCraft and doing thousands of combinations of simulations. If you've never used SimCraft on its own, I recommend that you try that sometime because I think it'll give you an appreciation for just how good of a job that Raidbots did. Raidbots made optimizing your gear and talents for the general use case really easy and something that everyone can do, so it was an activity that was no longer limited to being done by weirdos like me who were willing to do a bunch of tedious work to find the answers. However, there is a major problem with the answers that are provided by our currently available theory crafting tools. You see, tools like SimCraft are exquisitely accurate at modeling what players can do, but these simulations do not accurately model what combat looks like. They only model what combat looks like generally, not specifically. Sure, there are lots of different fight styles that you can set in Raidbots, but none of them actually look like what you end up doing when you're in combat. They're generalizations. This is where I see the next paradigm shift occurring. I believe that the next revolution in theory crafting will come when we can move away from this generalized case and can easily model specific encounters. If and when this happens, I am convinced that it'll change everything. And I believe that we are one motivated person or group away from this being a reality because, as I see it, all of the necessary ingredients for this revolution are in place. We just need somebody to bake the cake. Simulation Craft allows you to provide it with custom raid events. These are parameters that specify things like when a mob moves, how far it moves, and the frequency of that movement. Raid events can also be used to specify when ads show up and their movements and etc. In other words, you can use these parameters to model what any fight looks like. The problem is that currently, if you wanted to do that, it would be an exceptionally tedious and manual process because you would have to type out all of these parameters yourself. This is why it just doesn't happen. But this process could be automated and made much simpler. And there are two options that I see for how this could happen initially, with a log ripping tool or with a timeline canvas. Right now, you can go to Warcraft logs, and for each poll, you can watch a replay showing the positioning of all the units in the encounter. This is because whenever a unit does something that is captured in the logs, their position when that something occurred is also noted. If we could rip the data for mobs and bosses out and then convert it into a format understandable to SimCraft, aka raid events, then we could have a framework for the movements and the timings and the ad spawns and etc. for that fight, which we could then use to run simulations on and optimize for that fight specifically. Now, if we had a tool that would allow us to rip this data out of a single log and then send it into SimCraft, a logical next step would be to scale this up. Instead of pulling the data out of one kill, if you did that for thousands of logs, you could develop an average for what the movement is on a given fight, and you could do it for multiple different kill times. With a large enough sample size, it would likely be possible to also detect strategy variations. Imagine using Raidbots and being able to tell it, alright, simulate me doing Mythic Council, and we're doing a Stavros, Frida, Niklaus kill order, and it would be able to simulate what that looked like based off all of the publicly available kills using that strategy. Imagine that you had a tool like raidplan.io, but instead of it being a static canvas to create snapshots of what your strategy movement would be, you could craft a timeline. Now imagine you could take that timeline and import it into Raidbots and then run a Top Gear simulation based off of it. That's the premise of the timeline canvas method. It would be a tool that would allow you to visually and intuitively craft where mobs would be, when they'd move and where they'd move to, when ads would spawn, and so on and so forth, just as easily as you could do in Raidplan. A logical evolution of this tool would be to allow these timelines to be shareable. Just like people get their Mythic Dungeon tool routes from trusted sources, there would likely be people who become creators of boss timelines that people can use in their simulations. I suspect that over time, both of these tools would be made because both of them have certain advantages. The log ripping tool is excellent when there's a wealth of logs available to compare, namely later on in a raid tier. Additionally, I suspect that it would be the easier tool to create, though that is because even with my baby tier programming knowledge, I know all of the pieces and steps that would be required to make this initial tool, whereas I've never made a canvas or paint tool before, so I don't really know how difficult that would be. Lastly, assuming that there's boss kills available to pull from, this method would certainly be faster to use from the user perspective than the timeline canvas method, especially for things like Mythic Plus dungeon slices. The problem that I see with the log ripping tool is twofold. First, it only works if there's kills of the bosses, right? There's no way that you would be able to create simulations for potential strategies of upcoming bosses with this method. Second, Blizzard could kill this tool at any time. If they simply take away the position data from the logs, this method's dead. Now, the timeline canvas tool is excellent because it provides much more freedom. It would allow you to easily design any scenario to simulate rather than just currently available encounters. This makes it much more valuable earlier on in a tier when there are few or no boss kills yet. I can totally see guilds such as Complexity Limited and Echo using a tool like this to try to optimize for the strategies that they've developed during their testing. Additionally, this method would be Blizzard proof because it doesn't require combat logs or any actual game data for that matter. The problem that I see with the timeline canvas method is that until there are importable settings, it will require much more user action, which isn't really conducive to it being used by the casual player because they're not going to want to spend the time creating an entire encounter to simulate themselves. This tool could also potentially be harder to make. Like I said though, I don't really have any experience making a tool even remotely like this, so I'm not really sure. Now, I personally only have a novice level of programming experience, and most of my knowledge is self-taught and has only really involved me making really crappy Python scripts for personal use. I want these tools to exist, and I want everyone to have them. Such a project is beyond my abilities, and while I am definitely tempted to start trying to make a tool to rip position data from logs and then convert it into the SimCraft raid events, with my current skill and also my personal real-life schedule, it would likely take me at least 6 months to a year before I would be able to get it done. And even then, it would likely be a confusing and hard-to-use mess for anyone that isn't me. So this is my request. If you've got any programming skill, if you're interested in theory crafting, if you're interested in potentially making some money, because, well, honestly, I use Raidbots Premium and I'd absolutely pay to use a tool like this, or if you want to change World of Warcraft, then I implore you to start working on making this tool. If you're interested in making this tool, I am more than happy to help in any way that I can, so don't be afraid to get in contact with me. I also ask that you share this video with anyone you think might be able or interested in making such a tool. Now, with all of that said, tell me why my ideas are dumb. Tell me why this tool wouldn't change the game. Tell me why this tool couldn't be made. Tell me why I am wrong. Alternatively, I would love to hear what you think is going to be the next paradigm shift in the way that we play WoW. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching this video and subscribe for more.